All right, so again, all we've done so far, we read the documents, we saw that interconnectedness is in 3 out of the 5, so I can use that one. I'm comfortable with interconnectedness because me personally, I know a lot of historical circumstances and outside information for these events, okay, in terms of like modern day examples. Like I know that coming out with new iPhones every year contributes to the e-waste problem, right? These are the things I know about, so for me, this is an issue I could write about. You're going to want to use the issues that you're the most comfortable with that appear in 3 out of the 5. So when you write your first body paragraph, you're going to want to start with the topic sentence. Okay? Basically, the way I recommend doing this is you select the 3 documents, write a body paragraph for each of the documents. And the conclusion is going to be really quick, easy, simple. Right? They don't care so much about the conclusion. They care more about a good intro paragraph where you make an argument, which is what I'm doing here. Right? I'm arguing that interconnectedness is problematic because it appears in these 3 events. Right? Now I have to spend the rest of my essay basically proving this. So if you set up a good argument in your intro, you don't really need to worry. You don't need to worry so much about a conclusion paragraph. It's going to be really short, maybe 2 sentences for us when we get there. Okay, but the body paragraphs are important. So what you should probably do is start each body paragraph with a topic sentence that identifies the example that you're using to prove the issue. Well, what are the examples? The examples are the events that we listed in our introduction paragraph, right? The ones we're going to write about for each document, right? So Industrial Revolution was document 1, child labor is document 4, e-waste is document 5. So why don't we just go in order? We'll do document 1, and we'll do a topic sentence. All right, so maybe we do something like this. The Industrial Revolution in Britain is one historical event that illustrates the issue of interconnectedness. Okay, so I'll skip a line, and we'll start a body paragraph. I'll say the Industrial Revolution, which is the title I gave to document 1, is one historical event that illustrates the enduring issue of interconnectedness. Okay, they will not be grading you on your spelling or grammar on the Regents, but just good habits, right? Industrial Revolution is the name of a specific historical event, so I capitalized it here. The other ones that I made up for those sources are event names that I created. So since they're not like official event names, I didn't capitalize them. But don't sweat so much the grammar and spelling stuff on the essay. It's not going to count against you, which is probably a relief, right? Especially since you're going to be handwriting. So what do we do now, right? The pattern that I like to encourage the kids to follow involves this. Try to spend your first couple of sentences summarizing the main ideas of the document. So again, if you spent time in your note-taking stage writing down the main ideas, in theory, you should not have to reread this document. And when I say main ideas, I'm talking about the basic who, what, when, where, why type stuff, right? I wrote down the who, or the where, is Britain. 19th century is the time period. What happened? They mass-produced things. How/why? They used machines. Okay? I didn't put that here, but that could be part of the why. So I'm going to spend a couple of sentences firstly summarizing the document, and then what we should probably do, I don't believe it's going to count against you. If you forget to do it on the Regents, you should be fine. But it's probably a good habit to try to indicate to the reader where you got your information by doing one of those citations. You guys ever do that in class, citing a document, right, parentheses, right? And you guys with me, I know you've done that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a couple of sentences just summarizing that source. Okay, so I'll do the who, what, when, where, and why stuff. Okay, this is all right from the document, but in my own words. I'll say in the 19th century, Britain began mass producing goods such as textiles, comma, which led to a decline in prices and Britain's ability to dominate world trade. Parentheses, doc 1, because I'm done summarizing the main ideas of that document. Again, where did I get this information? It came from a document, but it also came from the notes that I took for that document when I was doing my brainstorm phase. Right? So at this point, we shouldn't have to worry about rereading the source if we had done that in the first place. Okay? There's a little bit more we're going to say about the document a little bit later, okay? Because remember, we're writing an essay about interconnectedness. I should be talking about information from my document that shows how people were connected. But before I do that, I'm going to take an opportunity to try to weave in some outside information, right? So for example, maybe we know a little bit about the Industrial Revolution in terms of how or why it started. That's not in the source. Okay, what they will be grading you on, right? A difference between like a 3 on the essay or a 5 on the essay, which is how they do the grading points. A lot of that difference comes from what other stuff are you throwing into the essay that's outside of the documents. Like, do you know the history? Can you make a connection to today? All right, so that's why the brainstorm phase is very, very important. That's why I put all this stuff from number 1 here, right? It began in Britain because of all the coal and iron. They invented a steam engine. It led to people moving into cities. The cities got overcrowded and polluted. Factories had poor conditions and low pay. So I'm going to try to weave that stuff in now into my body paragraph. All right, so I'll give some of the backstory now, right? The historical circumstances. I'll put the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, right here, capitalizing the event, due to the island's abundance of natural resources such as coal and iron, and the perfection of new inventions such as the steam engine. Okay, so again, just to recap, what am I doing now? I'm providing, and granted, me doing this would be different from you guys doing this because I know a lot of the history. This is my 12th year teaching global history, 10th grade. So you might not be able to include as much as I would be able to include, but that's okay. If you can make an attempt to include a little bit of the backstory for a document as part of your summary or right after your summary, that would be a good thing to try to do. I'm going to add a little bit more here just for the sake of review. All right, so I will say something about how since new factories were produced, a lot of people started to move to cities to take advantage of those factory jobs. Right, so I'll say as a result, which is a nice transitional phrase to show effects of things in history. So as a result, comma, people began migrating to cities in search of factory jobs. Okay, let's add a little bit more. Again, this is just good Industrial Revolution review overall. All right, so we talked about people moving into cities to get jobs. We'll say something about the pollution and the overcrowding. We'll say factories, comma, as well as early cities were often overcrowded with poor conditions. Okay? Now again, since my choice of an enduring issue is interconnectedness, I'm going to attempt in my next sentence here to use some outside information to illustrate interconnectivity in this time period. What's a new invention that they started using to make trade easier during this time? Trains, right? What's another one? What could I put that steam engine on to help me trade better other than a train? Boats, exactly, right? No planes just yet, no cars just yet, but you got steam engines on trains, steam engines on trains, and steam engines on boats, right? So those new technologies will help with this interconnectivity process. It's a good example of interconnectivity on this topic that's not in the document, so I'm going to go ahead and try to include that there. Okay, and again, this is me going above and beyond. I realize that, right? We're not expecting you guys to be able to pull this off to the same degree. I'm just showing you what you could do. All right, so I'll say something about those new inventions. So due to new technologies, such as Rob said, steamships and railroads that could connect the world over vast distances. Just gonna have to turn the page here. I'll go back if necessary. Actually, I'll just do this. That's probably easier for you guys to see. Next page. That could connect the world over vast distances. Affordable British goods found their way around the world. Okay? So I gave a little summary. I gave some background information, but it's relevant background information, right? It's how did the Industrial Revolution start? What happened during the Industrial Revolution that allows for more interconnectedness, right? Which is the subject of our Enduring Issues essay. Okay? What we haven't done yet, though, and it's an important part of the essay, is talk about the effects. We talked about one so far, right? People got access maybe to some British goods, but if it's an enduring issue, right, there's got to be a hint of things being a little bit problematic there, right? Maybe not everybody benefits from this kind of interconnectivity, right? So maybe we say something about how with all this trade, some people benefit with getting access to cheap things, but some people are forced to work in factories for low wages to produce those cheap things in factories. All right, so maybe, and this kind of goes back to the document summary itself, what I'm about to show you. Let me just write it down, and I'll show you where I found the information. All right, so a negative aspect of this interconnectedness is the use of cheap labor to make low-cost goods possible. Okay, goods is just a fancy way of saying stuff. I'll say people in factories typically earn extremely low wages. People in factories typically earned extremely low wages. I used past tense because in certain countries, right, with the ability to have labor unions fighting for better conditions, sometimes factory jobs actually, you can make a lot of money, okay? So that last part here, that negative aspect, was me, believe it or not, going all the way back to the document again, because it's talking about the use of cheap labor. Okay, so again, that part of my discussion is not outside information, but that's okay. You can kind of bounce back and forth between document summary and outside information. So to this point, yes, I know this is a big paragraph, right? We've got our intro. We began our body paragraph with a topic sentence indicating the event, illustrating the concept of interconnectedness. I spent a little time summarizing. I spent a lot of time on historical circumstances, right? That might be the part of your body paragraph, that might be shorter than mine. That's totally fine. If you give a little bit, it goes a long way. This is me just doing a lot of extra for the sake of review. And then, make sure you're highlighting and focusing on the positive and negative effects of your particular enduring issue, right? I'm talking about how trade is benefiting some people, but not everybody. You guys kind of with me so far? All right, so here's the really important part of the outside information. If you guys go into your Regents exam and you don't give any of these historical circumstances from outside the document, like if you didn't talk about the Industrial Revolution beginning in Britain because of coal and iron, that is not the worst thing in the world. What would be the worst thing in the world, though, is if you did not make an attempt to connect the issue in that document to what's going on more currently, because you're looking to prove that this is an enduring problem, right? Not just a problem that was faced by the British in the 1800s. Okay, so this is where, again, I'm going to draw upon my brainstorm and try to connect textiles and cheap labor and manufacturing of clothing to another part of the world today. And this is where I'll focus on fast fashion in Bangladesh to kind of round out my body paragraph and show that this kind of cheap labor in this kind of industry has not really gone away. So here's where I'll continue my outside information. I'll say interconnectedness. Notice how I keep dropping in the name of the issue I'm writing about. In this sense, meaning in the sense of people being interconnected to purchase inexpensive clothing, which is shown in the document, can be seen later in history as well. Okay? But you can't just stop there. You gotta give some kind of an example, right? And this is where I'm gonna talk about, since I know this stuff, you guys might have to write about something different. I'm gonna write about fast fashion, cheap labor, and textile production in countries like Bangladesh, right? That fast fashion. All right, so I'll say, for example, comma, indicating a transition to talking about something specific. We'll say much of the world's textile production, again, textiles is clothing, production has shifted to developing nations. Do you guys know what I mean when I call a nation a developing nation? Like what does that kind of imply if a nation's not developed but developing? Sure, a country that's not developed but developing, like it's not quite there yet, what problems might that country have? Think about the countries that are like not the US, China, like economic what? Good economy, bad economy. Problems, right? So maybe poverty, maybe the education system is not great, maybe the country always has civil war problems, right? So typically today, textile production is not done in places like Britain or the US, right? Those factories and those kinds of jobs have moved to developing nations where people are so impoverished that they might be willing to take those low-paying factory jobs. Okay, so developing nations in places such as Bangladesh, which is in South Asia. Okay, so I don't want to stop there. I want to talk a little bit about the problems of interconnectedness as it relates to being connected with Bangladesh to get our cheap clothing, right? So I will say there, comma, the production of textiles has gotten so inexpensive that it has contributed to the rise of the fast fashion industry. And I probably want to explain a little bit about what that fast fashion industry means, right? It means that clothing is so cheap that clothing almost becomes like going shopping becomes like a form of entertainment. Like, what am I doing tonight? Oh, we're going shopping. We're gonna buy a new style. It's really cheap. I'll wear it a couple of times. I'll chuck it. I'll buy something new, right? Which is not great because it contributes to a lot of waste, and it kind of reinforces these companies using cheap labor to make clothing as cheaply as possible, right? So maybe it's not the best thing that we have clothing so cheap sometimes, right? So here's where I'll explain that fast fashion definition. Fast fashion involves producing stylish clothing at extremely low prices that it is often disposed of quickly and replaced. All right, so maybe I want to focus on the negative aspect of that, right? This has had negative impacts, such as pressure on companies to keep wages low, clothing companies, let's say, and it also leads to frequent disposal of clothing, meaning throwing it out, contributing to more waste around the world. Whew, okay. Now we want to round out the paragraph with just some kind of a closing sentence. So I'll just simply say, this shows that interconnectedness can be problematic in the modern world. That's how I'm going to round this out. And then we're done with this body paragraph. This shows, notice how I keep referring back to the issue of, that's the topic of my essay, that interconnectedness can be problematic in the modern world. Whew, that's a big paragraph, right? Huge. Considering also that you still have to write two more, right? You have to write about the next event showing the effects of interconnectedness, and then one more. So again, obviously, yours on the Regents might not have as much in the way, again, of the historical circumstances, but like I said to you guys before, the real important part of your inclusion of outside information is finding a way to connect the problem in that document to something going on in the world today, right? Maybe show the problem in like in a similar sense, if you will. You kind of with me a little bit, hopefully? All right, so if we were writing a full essay, let's go back to our chart for a second, or our enduring issues checklist, right? So if I look back at my steps here, take a look at what I did, or what's on here in terms of bringing in outside information. What we did is part B here, right? After we summarized the document, we tried to connect, and we connected the issue to today and explained the similarities, which is how we could demonstrate continuity over time. What you could also do, and I'm probably risking confusing you guys by even mentioning this, instead of showing how the issue has continued, you can also choose instead to show how the impact of the issue has been lessened over time. Like, for example, we could approach this in a similar way here. Instead of me talking about, let's say, the fast fashion industry and how workers continue to be exploited to produce things in factories, we could go about this in the sense of writing about things that have changed the problem of cheap labor as a result of interconnectedness. Like, have we done anything in the world to lessen the impact of people being poor from cheap labor? Like, what happens in today's world? Or like in Britain, for example. In Britain, we don't have factories producing clothing in factories that exploit people, because what did they do in those factories for the workers? In the US, could they pay you $1 per hour? No. Minimum wage laws, right? So if you wrote instead about how the issue of interconnectedness with Britain is changed because they passed minimum wage laws, they made working conditions better, you could do that as well, right? If you talked about that, it would show how the issue has changed over time. That's confusing, and I think that's harder. I think the easiest thing to do is after you write about the historical event, right, summarization and historical circumstances, try to show how the problem is still existing somewhere else. That's why I focused my attention on this fast fashion stuff, right? Because using cheap labor and trading for clothing with other parts of the world is still going on today, right? We don't produce our own clothing, just like we didn't produce our own clothing when Britain was doing it, right? We're just getting it from somewhere else in the world that relies on cheap labor. It's just now Bangladesh. But what we should probably do next, and we'll have a few more minutes, but we could try to, continue this, is we wrote about one body paragraph, now we should do another one, right? So maybe we do another topic sentence. So we're just going to simply state the next historical event that proves that interconnectedness is an enduring issue. All right, so we could say another, don't worry, we're not going to write a whole another body paragraph together, that'd be crazy. Another, let's just practice the next topic sentence. Another historical example that shows the impact of interconnectedness was, and here is where I'll drop in the next document that we're writing about. But remember, we gave each of our documents a title. And I decided long ago, as part of my preparation, that I was going to use documents 1, 4, and 5. These are just my notes for today, right? So the next one I'm going to write about is document 4. So I go back to my notes about document 4, and I should have written down the name of that event, right? And I called this particular document Child Labor Around the World. So I'm going to put that in my topic sentence here, was child labor around the world. And what you should do is, you should do the same process as before, right? So you want to summarize the document by talking about the main ideas. And when you're done summarizing the document, you want to cite that document, maybe bring in some outside information, but also try to connect that document to something we see in another time period of history. All right, so for example, this document is talking about how kids are often exploited because kids are cheap to hire. We don't have to pay kids quite as much money. And this document is talking about how the world is trying to come together to try to stop this, to try to find ways to keep kids out of dangerous working conditions and instead spend more time going to school, right? School is safer. We train you how to do things like read and write better so that you can go off into the world and get better paying jobs, right? Not really bad paying jobs. So what I decided to do with my connecting to today was talking about how there are certain industries in which child labor is still relevant, okay? They made some attempts in Britain to kind of change that. They passed things called the Factory Acts. But again, if you're my student, we had a whole homework assignment about how kids are being hired in some poor countries in Africa to do some stuff. Do you guys remember what the kids are doing in Africa? Yes, good, cobalt mining, right? So kids are going into like really gross conditions, digging up dirt and rocks to mine for this thing called cobalt, which is a precious metal that is part of rechargeable batteries for our laptops, cars, and phones. Okay, so the issue of child labor and the exploitation of children is seen with interconnectedness because we trade for cobalt from another part of the world that's using cheap labor, right? So this interconnectedness can be a bit problematic. I also put down here in my notes that in the 1990s, Nike got in trouble because they were hiring kids to make shoes in China. Again, these are the things I know about. Everyone's going to be a little bit different when it comes to how we can tie modern events into the enduring issue shown in the document. That is certainly the hardest part of all this. And what I will say is if you can't do that for every document, that's also okay. If you could make one strong attempt in one of your body paragraphs to connect the issue to today, that should do it. Okay? They're probably not expecting you guys to come up with 3 modern examples of how that issue plays out in the world today. If you could do it once, you're probably fine.